Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's start chapter 2 of the book UFO Sightings by Alan Baker. This one focusing on close encounters of the second kind. So if you recall, my previous set of videos in this playlist was about close encounters of the first kind, involving seeing things from far away, maybe even in some cases closer by. But here, close encounters of the second kind has to do with this: measurable physical effects on the land and on inanimate and inanimate objects are reported. So in other words, you actually get to see stuff occurring to the land itself or on certain items. It could be trees or it could be cars or anything else, and then those are considered close encounters of the second kind. So this chapter will focus on that specifically. I'll spread this out over several parts as well, and then give my own thoughts and opinions on it, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are too. This is getting exciting. I love the idea that each chapter deals with a different kind of close encounter, and of course there'll be multiple examples listed here. So let's go ahead and let's feature that. And in this part, it starts off with the theme or the topic called the Maury Island Mystery. So here's what it says. The world of the close encounter with the unknown can be a very murky place, inhabited by unscrupulous sensation seekers as well as those who are genuinely mystified by what they have seen. In view of this unfortunate fact, it is worth including at least one generally accepted hoax to illustrate the importance of vigilance in dealing with extreme claims. Although total skepticism is just as unhelpful and unhealthy as total credulity, indeed there are actually opposite aspects of the same belief system, it is nevertheless essential to maintain an initial skepticism, erring on the side of the mundane until impressive evidence to the contrary can be gathered and evaluated. In this respect, the so-called Fortean approach, in which what is accepted remains constantly open to reinterpretation in the light of new evidence, is by far the best. As Charles Fort, from whose name the adjective Fortean is derived, said, "I conceive of nothing in religion, science, or philosophy that is more than the proper thing to wear for a while." With this in mind, let us take a look at one of the most famous close encounters of the second kind, the Maury Island incident. At about 2 p.m. on June 21st, 1947, Harold A. Dahl, a harbor patrolman in Tacoma, Washington, was in a boat off Maury Island. With him were his 15-year-old son, his dog, and then 2 crewmen. According to the story, they saw 6 large donut-shaped objects overhead. The objects seemed to be flattened spheres with a hole in the center and portholes around the rims. 5 of the objects were circling around the 6th, which seemed to be experiencing some kind of difficulty in keeping aloft. The witnesses watched as one of the other objects descended toward and then touched the one in trouble, which immediately began to discharge a metallic substance and a black material resembling rock. Harold Dahl had beached the boat on Maury Island and was taking photographs of the spectacle. Some of the material from the center object fell on them, killing the dog and injuring Dahl's son. The 6 objects then left the area, heading out over the sea. Dahl and the others then loaded the damaged boat with some of the material that had fallen from the object. Dahl told his boss, Fred Lee Chrisman, what had happened. Chrisman, angry over the damage to the boat and suspicious of the fantastic story he had been told, took another boat out to the island. There he found a large amount of material scattered on the beach. At that moment, another UFO emerged from a cloud. The Maury Island sighting had been brought to the attention of Raymond Palmer, the editor of Amazing Stories magazine, who sent Kenneth Arnold to investigate. Since his own sighting on 24th of June 1947, Arnold had become deeply interested in the subject of flying saucers and interviewed both Dahl and Chrisman on several occasions in late July. Dahl had another strange tale for Arnold. He claimed to have had breakfast with a mysterious man on the morning following that sighting. The black-suited man told Dahl he had seen something he shouldn't have and threatened both him and his family with dire consequences if he spoke to anyone else about it. When Arnold asked him for the photographs he had taken of the objects, Dahl replied that they were covered with spots, perhaps caused by radiation. Together with United States Captain E.J. Smith, who had seen a formation of UFOs during a flight on July 4, 1947, Arnold examined the debris from the Maury Island UFO, which looked to them like lava rock and scrap aluminum. They then enlisted the help of two Army Air Force intelligence officers, Lieutenant Frank M. Brown and then Captain William Davidson, with whom they had been in contact during previous UFO sightings. The two intelligence officers agreed to interview Dahl and Chrisman and to examine the alleged UFO debris. They arrived in Tacoma on the afternoon of July 31st. After the interviews and the debris examination, Brown and Davidson concluded that the whole story was a hoax. Subsequent Army Air Force investigations revealed that Dahl and Chrisman were not harbor patrolmen as they had claimed, but rather were salvagers of floating lumber. The official AAF report summed up the case by saying that both Dahl and Chrisman admitted that the rock fragments had nothing to do with the flying saucers. They admitted sending the rock fragments to Raymond Palmer as a joke, while telling him that they might have been part of a flying saucer. According to the August 4th issue of the San Francisco News, Dahl told the United Press Bureau at Tacoma that he had never had any pieces of a flying saucer. He had several metallic stones, which he had picked up on the beach at Maury Island just before the flying saucer craze swept the country. Likewise, the mysterious man who had threatened Dahl was no more than a figment of his imagination. With this, the Maury Island incident should have been co-signed to the wastebasket of ufology, one of the many lamentable hoaxes that had plagued the subject since its birth. This surely would have been the case were if not for a tragic accident that claimed the lives of the two AAF intelligence officers, Davidson and Brown. On August 1st, the B-25 aircraft in which they were flying back to Hamilton Field crashed as a result of a burning exhaust stack that set one of the wings on fire. The wing broke off, smashed into the tail, crippling the aircraft and then sending it plummeting into the ground. As aviation historian Curtis Peebles states in his skeptical analysis of ufology, Watch the Skies, these facts were woefully absent from the Tacoma Times report of the following day. Under the headline, Sabotage Hinted in Crash of Army Bomber at Kelso, the report stated that the B-25 had been sabotaged or shot down to prevent shipment of flying disc fragments. An intelligence officer had evidently confirmed that the aircraft had been carrying classified material. That classified material, however, was merely a collection of reports that had nothing to do with UFOs. There had been nothing sinister about the crash. It had been caused by an aircraft malfunction and nothing more. The Maury Island incident, together with its tragic conclusion, serves as a prime example of the ease which with certain UFO reports can take on a life of their own and remain the subjects of furtive rumors long after they've been proved to be spurious. Cases of this kind are extremely irritating to serious UFO researchers, since they do not only provide grist for the mills of ardent debunkers who maintain that there are no genuinely anonymous UFOs and never have been, but also muddy the waters around the subject in general, making it even harder to approach a possible solution to its central mysteries. Next topic is the death of Captain Mantell. Although there have been a number of deaths over the years that have been linked to UFO or alien activity, the first widely publicized incident of this kind was the fatal encounter between Captain Thomas Mantell and a strange object sighted in the skies over Godman Air Force Base, Kentucky. This classic case began on January 7th, 1948, at about 1:20 p.m. Central Time, when the Kentucky State Police contacted the military police at Fort Knox, alerting them to the presence of an unidentified aircraft approximately 250 to 300 feet in diameter over Mansfield, Kentucky. Fort Knox then passed on this information to nearby Gorman Air Force Base. The object was sighted in the southwest at 1:45 p.m. by personnel in the Godman Control Tower, who described it as resembling an ice cream cone topped with red. According to the operations officer, Captain Gary W. Carter, the object was easily discernible with the naked eye. The object appeared round and white, wider than the clouds that passed in front of it, and could be seen through cirrus clouds. At about that time, 4 F-51 Mustang aircraft took off from Marietta Air Force Base, Georgia, on a low-altitude navigation training flight. The flight leader was Captain Thomas F. Mantell of the Air National Guard, 165th Fighter Squadron, an experienced pilot with a total of 2,867 hours flight time. At about 2:40 p.m., the 4 F-51s were in the vicinity of Godman Air Force Base, and Mantell was asked if he could check out the mysterious object that was still hanging in the skies over the base. One of the Mustangs, short on fuel, had to continue on to Standiford Air Force Base, the flight's intended destination, while Mantell and the remaining aircraft climbed on an intercept course toward the object. When the Mustangs reached 15,000 feet, Mantell, ahead of the others, radioed to Godman, "The object is directly ahead and above me now, moving at about half my speed. It appears to be a metallic object or possibly reflection of sun from a metallic object, and it is of tremendous size. I'm still climbing. The object is above and ahead of me, moving at about my speed or faster. I'm trying to close in for a better look." The two remaining Mustangs abandoned the chase at 22,000 feet due to lack of oxygen. Since they had been on a low-altitude flight, they had not taken oxygen supplies. Mantell informed Godman that he would go to 25,000 feet for 10 minutes. When he reached that altitude, he evidently passed out from lack of oxygen, while his aircraft continued to climb to 30,000 feet before finally leveling off. With no one to guide it, the plane succumbed to the torque of its own engine and began a left turn, which gradually steepened into a spiraling dive. At around 15,000 feet, the Mustang disintegrated. The shattered wreckage was located on the farm of a William J. Phillips near Franklin, Kentucky. Mantell's body was still in the cockpit. His watch had stopped at 3:18 p.m. The two other pilots flew on to Standiford Air Force Base, unaware that Mantell had crashed. One of the pilots, Lieutenant A.W. Clements, refueled and secured an oxygen supply before taking off again in search of the UFO. Although he climbed to 32,000 feet, he could not find no trace of the object. Shortly after, the Godman Tower lost the object at 3:50 p.m. It was sighted to the south in Tennessee. At about 4:40 p.m., an astronomy professor at Vanderbilt University watched an object through binoculars and later described it as a pear-shaped balloon with cables and a basket. The Mantell incident was investigated by personnel from Project Sign, who concluded, at least publicly, that the pilot had died chasing the planet Venus. Although this explanation sounded plausible, Venus was in the area of the sky in which the UFO had been sighted, was at the same 33-degree elevation and moving at 15 degrees per hour, a pace consistent with the planet's apparent movement. It suffered from the fact that the planet was only half at its maximum brightness and was therefore hard to see against the brightness of the sky. News of Mantell's death spread quickly, and the press had a field day with the possibility that a military officer had died in pursuit of a flying saucer. Strange rumors quickly followed. Mantell's body had been discovered riddled with bullet holes. His head was missing. His entire body was missing. The F-51 had been soaked in radiation, and so on. None of this was ever verified, and it seems that all of the rumors were spurious. According to the accident report, the emergent canopy lock was still in place, implying that Mantell had indeed passed out from lack of oxygen without making any attempt to bail out. The throttle and propeller pitch controls were in positions that would have slowed the aircraft down, which seemed to indicate that Mantell had regained consciousness long enough to attempt to pull out of the dive. This maneuver was evidently too much for the aircraft, which disintegrated under the strain. As to the object itself, Captain Ruppelt re-examined the case in 1952 and discovered that a skyhook balloon had been launched from Camp Ripley, Minnesota early on the morning of these sightings. These experimental high-altitude balloons were being secretly tested by the U.S. Navy at the time and were unknown to Air Force officers. In addition, weather charts for January 7, 1948 indicated that such a balloon would indeed have floated over Kentucky and Tennessee. However, there remains one unanswered question in the Mantell case, which, ironically enough, arises from similar considerations to those that more or less proved the illusory nature of Kenneth Arnold's UFOs the previous year. According to Project Sign's analysis of the incident, it has been officially reported that the object was a Navy cosmic ray research balloon. If this can be established, it is to be preferred as an explanation. However, if one accepts the assumptions that reports from various other localities refer to the same object, any such device must have been a good many miles high in order to have been seen clearly, almost simultaneously, from places 175 miles apart. No man-made object could have been large enough and far enough away from the approximate simultaneous sightings. The implication is that just as Arnold's UFOs could not have been 25 miles away and recognizable as structured craft, the skyhook balloon explanation in the Mantell case could not account for the size of an object observable from such widely separated vantage points. It was simply too large and too far away from the various observers. It is also worth bearing in mind Mantell's description of the object as tremendous in size. If it were tremendous in size while still thousands of feet above him, it seems unlikely that it was a 100-foot long balloon, and yet, if it were tremendous in size because he was actually quite close to it, surely he would have recognized it as a balloon, even one belonging to a secret project. Although the Mantell case is generally regarded as having been solved, this puzzling question does remain, casting a faint shadow of doubt over it. While we will never know with absolute certainty what Captain Mantell was chasing when he died, perhaps it was a balloon, or perhaps it was something that left behind the most extreme of physical traces, a shattered plane and its dead pilot. Next segment is called a 30-ton UFO. Although apparent alien beings were encountered in the following case, it is more significant as a close encounter of the second kind in that definite measurable physical traces were left behind. The September 15, 1944 issue of Francois carried the following reports of Marius de Wilde's experience. 3 investigators for the air police arrived at Corrible Nord yesterday to interview M. Marius de Wilde, the man who saw 2 Martians near his backyard gate. They left the village convinced that during the night of Friday to Saturday, a mysterious craft had indeed landed, as claimed by M. de Wilde, on the tracks of the Saint Amand Blanc Misseron railway line near crossing number 79. Their inquiries seem in effect to confirm the statement made by the metal worker. The witnesses declared that on Friday, at about 10:30 p.m., he had seen a machine of an elongated shape, 3 meters high, 6 meters long, sitting on the tracks a few meters away from his house. 2 beings of human appearance, of very small height and apparently wearing diving suits, could be seen nearby. Then de Wilde walked towards them, but at that moment, a beam of greenish light was focused on him from the craft, and he found himself paralyzed. When he's able to move again, the machine had started to rise and the 2 beings had disappeared. The investigators have found no trace of the existence of these beings. The ground, examined meter by meter, showed a trace of footsteps. However, there are traces on the sleepers that could have been made by a machine landing on it. In 5 places, the wood of the sleepers is compressed over an area of about 4 square centimeters. These markings all have the same appearance and they lie symmetrically on one line. 3 of them, those in the middle, are 43 centimeters apart. The last 2 are 67 centimeters away from the preceding ones. A craft landing on legs instead of wheels like our own aircraft could have just left such traces, one of the inspectors of the air police had declared. M. de Wilde's story is also confirmed by several inhabitants of the region. In Onaing, at about 10:30 p.m., the time indicated by M. de Wilde, a young man called M. Edmund Everlin and a retired man, M. Hubbard, saw a reddish light traveling in the sky. This same light was seen from Vic by 3 young men. And so the air police investigators consulted various railroad specialists about the markings on the wooden sleepers. After examining the sleepers, the specialists concluded that the marks had been made by something exerting a pressure of 30 tons. In addition, the marks had sharply defined edges, which supported the conclusion that an extremely heavy weight had been involved. The police also examined the gravel of the railroad bed and made another, perhaps even more intriguing discovery. According to the great French ufologist Aimé Michael, writing in his 1958 book Flying Saucers and the Straight Line Mystery, they found that the stones at the site of the landing were brittle, as if they had been calcined. In other words, they had apparently been subjected to intense heat, which had raised their temperature just below their melting or fusing point, causing a chemical reduction or oxidation. Blackish traces were also found at the landing site. According to the report, the ground around the landing site was hard. Therefore, the fact that there were no footprints did not cast doubt on Marius de Wild's story. In fact, when compared with the positive physical evidence that was discovered, the lack of footprints in hard soil fades into insignificance. Then that's it. Let's go ahead and let's conclude this part 1 of chapter 2, called Close Encounters of the Second Kind, once again coming from the book UFO Sightings by Alan Baker. Let's go ahead and let's talk about that briefly here. First off, you can see the differences, right, when it comes to these themes on chapter 2 with Close Encounters of the Second Kind compared to the first kind. Here you have several cases involving physical evidence, like something actually happening to nearby, like whatever the observers are seeing, and in some cases like physical fragments themselves. First off, the Maury Island mystery, I believe I did talk about that one time. It was one where it seemed like there was a UFO that was almost like dumping trash within an area. I talked about that in a video and it got a good number of views. Lots of good comments on there too, so it was interesting to find that here as well. Fascinating too that it also alludes to the fact that yes, apparently they were in turn making things up. Now it does make you wonder though, were they making things up because they suddenly had a big pressure from who knows, somebody intimidating, who knows, telling them to basically lie about what occurred, and if they didn't, then something really bad would happen to them. That's the implication that I read when I was reading the information here from this chapter, to go from one place stating that they have physical evidence, they have photographs as well, and then going into another place where they're stating, oops, never mind, I made it up. That's a big difference, right, when it comes to whatever they were stating over the course of time. And then you had the death of Captain Mantell. In his case, his physical object was seeing something up in the sky, which lo and behold could have been involved, let's say, with that weather balloon. That big thing for me though is how can something travel so fast as like that? Obviously Captain Mantell was chasing it. You got to figure that he's going several hundred miles per hour. I don't know if weather balloons can go that fast. Somebody might have to let me know. But if he was chasing something and the author was right, he would have recognized it as a weather balloon. He would have stopped at a certain point, but clearly that didn't happen, and so he continued. But we never know, because in his case, he tragically ended up dying chasing whatever this thing was, and he was the only witness to it. And then the last one, I haven't heard of this one. This one's going to be fascinating. I might talk about this in a future video. The 30-ton UFO. Imagine that, physical markings that are there on a railroad bed or a sleeper, whatever that is. So something had apparently landed there, and not only that, but it had caused enough pressure to be able to leave markings. How cool would that be? I mean, imagine being right there later on, inspecting it. You see these markings, and they're the markings of an extraterrestrial craft. I mean, it's literally right there. You could touch those markings if you wanted to. That's the kind of stuff that I would love to go see, especially when it comes to a specific spot. So again, I might talk about that in a future video, because when it says something along the lines of the Saint Amand blank Misseron railway line near crossing number 79, that gets pretty exact. So that'd be pretty interesting to see if I could find pictures of that exact spot on Google Maps or Bing Maps later on. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Let me know what your thoughts are too. Take care. Bye.